You don't really think about it until it's right in front of you. The day you realize that time has been slipping through your fingers like sand, and the world you once ran through with youthful energy has now slowed to a careful, measured walk. And then, before you know it, you find yourself facing one of life's most difficult choices, where you will spend the final stretch of your years. Most people don't think much about nursing homes until the time comes when either they or someone they love has to consider one. By then, the decision is often rushed, clouded by stress, guilt, or even a sense of obligation. But if you ask someone who's lived long enough, someone who has seen it all and spent years watching others make this decision, they'll tell you a truth that isn't always comfortable to hear. Nursing homes are not always the answer, and for many, they become the last place they ever wanted to end up. I've had friends go into them, some by choice, some because their families felt they had no other option. And I've seen what happens behind those doors, not just the cleanliness and the order, but the loneliness, the loss of dignity, the slow fading away of a person who once had a full, rich life. The truth is, a nursing home is not just a place. It's a shift, a surrender of independence, a moment when society quietly tells you that you are now too much to be handled anywhere else. People will tell you that a nursing home is necessary, that it's the best option when care becomes too demanding. But I've learned that more often than not, the people pushing hardest for these choices are not the ones who will live with them. It's the adult children, exhausted and overwhelmed, who feel they have no choice. It's the hospital discharge planners, the doctors, the well-meaning social workers. But what they don't always say is that once you enter a place like that, you are on a path that few ever leave. The promises sound good at first. Round-the-clock care, meals provided, medical attention, safety. And for some, this does bring peace of mind. But what they don't tell you is the other side of it, the loss of control over your own life, the rigid schedules that dictate when you eat, when you bathe, even when you can have visitors. They don't tell you about the small indignities that add up over time. Waiting for someone to help you to the bathroom. Eating food that tastes like it was made for a hospital, not a home. The frustration of calling for assistance and waiting longer than you should. And then there's the loneliness. You can have a room full of people, all in the same phase of life, and still feel completely alone. Because what makes life rich is not just company, it's purpose. It's waking up with something to do, someone to love, a reason to move forward. Nursing homes often strip that away, leaving only routines and repetition. You sit, you wait, you exist. And for many, that's when they truly start to fade. I've seen it happen. A friend of mine, John, was a man who used to fix anything with his hands. Give him a broken radio, a watch, even a car, and he'd have it working again in no time. He was sharp, active. Then he fell, broke his hip, and the doctor told his family he'd be safer in a nursing home. Within a year, he wasn't the same man. No tools, no projects to tinker with, no real work to keep his mind sharp. He spent his days in a chair, staring at the TV. The light in his eyes dimmed, and before long, he was gone. That's the truth people don't want to talk about. Nursing homes don't just take care of the elderly, they often take away the very things that keep us alive. Now, does that mean there are no good ones? Of course not. There are places with kind nurses, clean rooms, and a sense of community. But they are rare, and even the best ones can't replace a real home. They can't replace being around family, around things that matter. So what's the alternative? That's the real question. Because saying no to a nursing home is one thing, but finding a better solution is another. And the truth is, there are better ways, but they require a shift in how we think about aging, how we treat our elders, and how we prepare for the future. Before we get into those alternatives, let's take a step back and ask ourselves something important. Why have nursing homes become the default answer? What happened to the days when families cared for their elders at home, when aging wasn't something to be hidden away, but embraced as a natural part of life? Maybe the real issue isn't nursing homes themselves, but the way society has changed. Families are spread out, busy with work, children, their own responsibilities. Life moves faster than it used to, and taking care of an aging parent can feel overwhelming. But does that mean we should just send them away? Shouldn't we be looking for ways to bring care back into the home instead of outsourcing it? The truth is, there are options, real, viable options, that don't involve giving up independence or dignity, but they require planning, effort, and a willingness to think differently. And that's exactly what we'll talk about next. Because if you ask someone who's been around long enough, they'll tell you, the last years of your life should be spent in comfort, in a place that feels like home, with people who truly care, not in a place where you're just another number on a chart. But how do we make that happen? That's where the real wisdom comes in. And that's exactly what we'll get into in the next part. The question no one seems to ask is, how did we even get here? It wasn't always like this. There was a time, not too long ago, when nursing homes weren't the standard answer for aging. Elders stayed in the home, cared for by their children, their grandchildren, their own people. It wasn't just a duty, it was the natural way of life. The old took care of the young, and when the time came, the young took care of the old. There was balance, an unspoken agreement between generations, but somewhere along the way, things changed. Society shifted. Life got faster. Family structures broke apart. And before we knew it, the responsibility of caring for our elders was handed off to institutions. Not because people stopped loving their parents, but because they felt they had no other choice. Think about it. Look at how we live today. Families are smaller than they used to be. A century ago, a household often had 3, sometimes even 4 generations under one roof. There was always someone around to lend a hand, to watch over the elders, to make sure they were part of the home. But today, people move away for work, for school, for opportunities. They live in different states, different countries. And even when they do live close by, life is so packed with responsibilities, jobs, bills, raising children, that taking care of an elderly parent seems impossible. And then there's the economic reality. Nursing homes became big business. What was once a last resort turned into a billion-dollar industry. Think about that for a second. An entire industry profiting from the idea that elders don't belong at home. It's no surprise that every solution pushed by hospitals, social workers, and even some doctors leads straight to a facility. Not because it's the best option, but because it's the most profitable one. It's not just about convenience, it's about money. I've seen it happen firsthand. A friend of mine, Margaret, had 3 children. She never imagined she'd end up in a nursing home. But when her health declined, her kids were told the same thing many families hear. She needs more care than you can provide. What they weren't told was that in-home care was an option. That with some adjustments, she could have stayed in a familiar place, surrounded by family. Instead, they were given brochures for nursing homes, numbers for admissions offices, and the message was clear. This was the right choice. But was it? Margaret never adjusted. She missed the sounds of home, the smell of her kitchen, the comfort of her own furniture. She went from being a mother, a grandmother, a woman who once baked the best apple pie you'd ever taste, to just another resident, in a room identical to all the others. She lived another 5 years, but not the way she wanted. And that's what people don't realize. Aging isn't just about survival, it's about quality of life. Now, I'm not saying families are to blame, not at all. Most people don't know they have a choice. They don't know that there are alternatives. They don't know that a few simple changes can make all the difference. And that's exactly what we need to talk about. So what can be done? How can we shift away from the nursing home model and back towards something that actually works for the people who matter most? It starts with mindset. We have to stop seeing elders as burdens. Society has conditioned us to believe that once someone reaches a certain age, they become a problem to manage instead of a person to cherish. That's the first thing that has to to change. An elder is not just an aging body. They are a lifetime of wisdom, experiences, stories. They are a connection to the past, a link between generations. But when we put them in institutions, we break that link. We separate them from the family, from the people who love them most. The next thing we have to do is rethink what care actually looks like. Most people assume that if someone needs help with daily tasks, a nursing home is the only option. That's simply not true. There are alternatives, better alternatives, that allow elders to stay in a place that feels like home without sacrificing their safety or well-being. In-home care is one of them. Many people don't realize that with a little bit of planning, aging at home is not only possible but often cheaper than a nursing home. Yes, it takes effort. Yes, it requires adjustments, but it's worth it. Hiring a part-time caregiver, modifying the home for accessibility, using technology for remote monitoring. These are all things that can make a world of difference. And then there's community living. Not the big corporate-run facilities, but small shared homes where a handful of elders live together with caregivers who actually know them, care about them, and treat them like family. These places exist. They are not as common as they should be, but they are there. And they are a far better option than a facility where someone is just a name on a clipboard. The truth is, it's not about whether someone can age outside of a nursing home. It's about whether people are willing to explore the possibilities. And that takes effort, not just from families, but from society as a whole. Governments should be investing in home care, not just institutions. Communities should be creating spaces where elders can stay engaged, not isolated. And most importantly, families should start planning early, before a crisis forces a rushed decision. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my years, it's that the hardest decisions in life are the ones we put off until it's too late. No one wants to think about aging until it happens. But by then, choices are limited. And that's why these conversations need to happen now, not when a hospital is telling you there's no other option. There are always options. In the next section, we'll get into the real, practical steps families can take to make aging at home a reality. Because the truth is, no one wants to spend their final years in a place that feels like a waiting room for the end. And with the right planning, no one has to. It's one thing to talk about alternatives. It's another to actually make them happen. For most people, the idea of keeping an elder at home instead of a nursing facility sounds good in theory, but overwhelming in practice. They wonder, how do I afford it? How do I manage care? What if my loved one needs more help than I can give? These are real concerns. But I'll tell you something. Every problem has a solution. You just have to be willing to find it. I've seen families make it work, even when they thought they couldn't. I've seen elders stay in their own homes, living full, meaningful lives instead of fading away in a facility. And I've seen people regret rushing into a nursing home decision when, with a little planning, they could have avoided it entirely. The truth is, staying at home in old age is not impossible. It just takes a shift in mindset and a willingness to put the right pieces in place. So, where do you start? First, you plan ahead, before it's too late. Most people don't think about aging until a crisis forces them to. A fall, an illness, a hospital stay. Suddenly the question isn't what's best, it's what's fastest. And that's when nursing homes step in. But if you start planning before a crisis, you stay in control. Start with a simple question. What would it take to keep an elder at home safely? The answer will be different for everyone. Some people need minor adjustments, maybe a safer bathroom setup, a few hours of help each day, or meals delivered. Others might need full-time care. The key is to plan before it becomes an emergency. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that home care is more expensive than a nursing home. That's simply not true. Think about the cost of a facility. Most nursing homes charge thousands of dollars a month, often more than what it would take to hire in-home help. But because people don't think about it in advance, they assume there's no choice. That's why the next step is to explore home care options early, not just when you think you need them, but years before. There are different levels of home. Care and understanding them now can make all the difference later. Companion care, for elders who don't need medical help but need assistance with things like cooking, cleaning, and errands. Personal care, for those who need help with bathing, dressing, or medication reminders. Skilled nursing at home, for those with medical needs that require professional care. Most people assume full-time nursing home care is the only option when an elder needs help. But in reality, most elders only need part-time care, and with the right setup, they can stay home safely. And here's something most families never consider. Medicaid, Medicare, and veterans benefits often cover home care services. But nursing. Homes won't tell you that, because once you're in their system, you become their customer, and they profit from keeping you there. If you or your loved one is eligible for government programs, look into Home and Community-Based Services, HCBS. They exist for a reason. But people don't use them because they don't know they exist. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: family involvement. This is where things get tricky, because not every family member is willing or able to take care of an aging parent. And in some cases, elders don't want to be a burden on their children. I've had people tell me, "I don't want my kids to have to take care of me." And I understand that. But there's a difference between being a burden and being abandoned. There's a middle ground. Not every family has to provide full-time care. But even small things, checking in regularly, visiting often, making sure an elder has what they need, can make all the difference. And let me tell you something else. Elders don't just need care. They need purpose. One of the biggest reasons people decline in nursing homes is because they have nothing to do. No responsibilities, no routines, no reason to wake up excited for the day. But at home, that can be different. If you want to keep an elder healthy, don't just focus on physical care, focus on keeping them engaged in life. I knew a man named Robert, 85 years old, sharp as ever. His family made a simple choice that changed everything. They gave him a job. Every morning, his task was to make coffee and toast for the family. Seemed small, right? But that routine gave him something to wake up for, something to look forward to. That's what nursing homes take away. The feeling of being needed. Aging at home isn't just about survival, it's about living. And if you ask me, that's the difference between simply growing old and actually having a life worth living. Now, some people will say, that all sounds good, but what if home care isn't enough? That's a fair question, because in some cases, full-time care is needed. But even then, there are better options than a traditional nursing home. Most people think they have only two choices: keep an elder at home, which can feel overwhelming, put them in a nursing home, which often feels like a last resort. But here's what they don't realize: there are other options, good options. Options that keep dignity, independence, and quality of life intact. The problem is these options aren't widely talked about. You won't hear about them from a hospital discharge planner. You won't see them advertised the way big nursing homes are, because they aren't part of the massive profit-driven system that benefits from keeping elders in facilities. But they exist, and if you're willing to look beyond the obvious, you can find a solution that feels right. One of the best alternatives to a traditional nursing home is small-scale community living. You might be wondering, what's that? It's simple. Instead of a massive institutional nursing home with hundreds of residents, these are small, home-like settings where a handful of elders live together with caregivers who actually know them. It's the closest thing to staying in a real home while still getting care. There are a few different versions of this. Elder co-housing, a group of seniors sharing a home, supporting one another while pooling resources for a caregiver. Adult. Foster homes, small licensed homes where a few elders live with a dedicated caregiver. The Greenhouse Project, a revolutionary concept where 8-12 elders live in a house with a trained care team, but without the sterile, hospital-like feel of a nursing home. These models work because they preserve normal life. Instead of long hallways and rotating shifts of unfamiliar staff, elders live in a familiar space with real relationships and personalized care. Meals are cooked in a shared kitchen. Schedules are flexible. There's a sense of home. And guess what? Studies show that elders in small-scale community homes live longer and happier lives compared to those in traditional nursing facilities. The reason is simple. They don't feel abandoned. If you or a loved one is facing the decision of long-term care, look into these models. They aren't as common as big nursing homes, but they're growing. And in many cases, they cost the same or less than a traditional facility. Another overlooked option is intergenerational living. We tend to separate age groups in our society. Kids go to school, adults go to work, and elders are placed in homes. But in many cultures, elders remain a central part of family life, playing an active role in raising grandchildren, sharing wisdom, and staying engaged. Some families make this work by creating multi-generational households. A separate living space within the home, a converted garage, an in-law suite, small adjustments that allow an elder to stay close without feeling like a burden. And for those who don't have family nearby, there are new intergenerational housing, communities popping up, places where seniors, young adults, and even college students live together, helping one another in daily life. A program in the Netherlands, for example, allows college students to live rent-free in senior housing in exchange for spending time with elders. The result? The elders feel connected, the students gain wisdom, and loneliness disappears on both sides. It's a win-win. And it proves that aging doesn't have to mean isolation. Now let's talk about something else that's often ignored: aging with purpose. One of the biggest reasons elders decline isn't just physical health. It's a lack of meaning. Take a man who spent his whole life working, providing for his family, fixing things with his hands, and suddenly he's told to just sit in a chair and relax. That's not living. That's waiting to die. Purpose keeps people alive. Nursing homes often strip that away, but the right environment gives it back. Let's not forget the role of technology in making aging at home easier than ever before. We live in a time where elders can have 24/7 medical monitoring without leaving their house. Devices like smart home systems, fall detection sensors, and video calls mean that staying at home is safer and more connected than ever before. Families can check in remotely. Medication reminders can be automated. Virtual doctor visits can replace unnecessary trips to the hospital. These are things that didn't exist decades ago, but today, they can make all the difference. The real problem isn't that alternatives don't exist. It's that people don't know about them. The nursing home industry thrives on fear and urgency. They make you believe that once an elder needs help, a facility is the only answer. But that's simply not true. If you take nothing else from this, remember this one thing: aging doesn't have to mean losing dignity, independence, or connection. You have choices, always. And if you or a loved one is at that crossroads, take the time to explore them. Because the final years of life should be lived, not just endured.